Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Patricia Houde, and I'm here with Kenneth Richter, my colleague from the University of Guanajuato. We are going to present teachers' beliefs and reflective practice through collective accompaniment. The main objective of our research is to explore the development of pedagogical beliefs of ESL teachers using reflective practice by means of a collective accompaniment model. And we have 4 different research objectives, which is to record pedagogical beliefs before and after the reflective process, to document the impact of reflection on the professional development of teachers, to describe teaching practices according to various contexts, and to analyze the development of pedagogical beliefs throughout the reflective process. A few of the concepts we are dealing with is pedagogical beliefs, which has shown incongruity between pedagogical beliefs and actions observed in teaching practice, which is why we're doing this research. We are using reflective practice, which is the ongoing self-deliberative and self-edifying process of assessing one's professional experiences. It is widely recognized to be a sine qua non of closing the gap between theoretical knowledge and professional practice. It's also the act of stepping back to critically examine one's operating modes and analyze both individually and collectively the acts and actions that we carry out in our professional intervention. We are using collective accompaniment as an intervention in this research. It's a way to conduct reflective practice in small group of professionals in collaboration with peers, where participants are treated as equal partners, everyone providing insight to support others. The basic principles or concepts in the collective accompaniment model that we use by Guillemette is accompaniment, which is joining with the other and offering support, facilitating the potential members involved. Analysis is another concept, which is the capacity to analyze professional practice, and reflexivity, which is inquiry on practice, identifying and interpreting motivation beneath our actions, and the adjustment of practice to transform actions in professional context. The tools we use to conduct the reflective process, it's basically listening, questioning, and giving feedback, or reformulating and synthesizing the discourse, the ideas that have been shared. We use the collective accompaniment model. As I mentioned, this is a model where people sit around and talk to each other, but facing each other. I will show the model in a second, but this is basically how this is being done usually, but we are now online, so everything is done in video calls. This is the model we use, which has 3 different phases: preparation phase, realization phase, and introspection phase. And the realization phase has 4 different axes. The first one is to question and observe. The second one is to analyze and reflect. The third one is to plan for actions. And the fourth one is to experiment and act between the sessions. This is an action research for the participants. Our methodology, well, we are using a mixed methods research. We use RepGrid interviews and participatory action research. Our intervention is conducted through sessions, collective accompaniment sessions every other week. The sessions are conducted online for 3 hours. Our research participants are 10 ESL teachers teaching in the state of Guanajuato who have graduated from the BAT SOL. We are working with participatory action research, as I mentioned, and so our participants are co-researchers. We focus on change and actions to understand a social phenomena, and it's a participatory process concerned with developing practical knowing in the pursuit of worthwhile human purposes. We have 6 data collection instruments. My colleague Kenneth will explain the rep grid in depth. I won't go into more depth right now with the others, but the ethics for the research, well, in this type of research, we need to understand there's a confidentiality. Protection of identity and privacy is very, very important because we work with groups of people. So there is emphasis done on this at each sessions. I will give the microphone to Ken.
Okay, thank you very much, Patty. My name is Kenneth Richter, and I'm going to step in and briefly talk about one of the ways that we're gathering data. As Patty mentioned, we're using a mixed methods approach, and we're gathering data in a number of different ways, trying to focus on this intervention from as many directions as possible. One of the ways that we're doing that is the use of something called a repertory grid. We're giving these repertory grid interviews before and after the intervention as one way of seeing how, perhaps even if, our participants' thinking about their pedagogy has changed over the course of these sessions. Okay. The repertory grid, I'm guessing that most people are unfamiliar with this data elicitation instrument. It comes from George Kelly's personal construct psychology. He was a mathematician and psychologist. Although he invented the repertory grid for psychological examinations, clinical psychology, they are now used in many, many different areas, including educational research. They're interesting because it's a kind of semi-structured interview with both qualitative and quantitative features. Okay, so we're going to look at two things. The first thing we're going to look at is how to conduct a rep grid interview. This is a repertory grid. As you can see, it's actually a grid. That's why it's called a repertory grid. The things you're looking at, the columns on the top, the slanted columns, are what we're going to be talking about with our participants. These all represent teachers that the participants have had in the past. You can see that there are names for each of these categories: a great second language teacher, a great teacher, an average second language teacher, an average teacher, a bad second language teacher, a bad teacher, the participant in the past, the participant now, and the participant as they would like to be in the future. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is just fill those in. We start the discussion with the participant, and I simply ask them to think back about their educational experiences and fill those categories with people that they know from their past. The theoretical foundation of that comes from Lorty's apprenticeship of observation, the idea that most of us teach in the way that we were taught. By filling in those categories, this allows us to create constructs. Constructs are simply the ideas that people hold about a given terrain, a given field. The way that constructs are created is by talking to the participants about the teachers and comparing and contrasting them. For instance, I might ask a participant to compare or contrast a great second language teacher and a bad second language teacher. The teacher might say about the bad second language teacher that they taught grammar. It was too much grammar. They taught grammar every day. And the participant remembers that they didn't like all that traditional explicit grammar teaching. So we'd fill that in. It's a negative thing. So I put it over on the right side there, too much grammar. The next thing we do, I would ask the participant, what do you think the opposite of too much grammar is? This is a very interesting part of the interview because these answers can be highly idiosyncratic. For some people, the opposite of too much grammar is no grammar at all. But generally, you get more thoughtful responses, responses such as the opposite of too much grammar is using the communicative approach or the task-based approach, or perhaps a good teacher uses lots of games. So whatever that answer is, we're going to put it on the other side of the grid, and the reason we do that will become apparent very soon. So you just continue that way, comparing, contrasting different teachers. You just pick teachers at random and compare or contrast them, and keep generating more and more constructs until the participant simply has nothing more to say. When you've done that, when you've finished that, you have a very long list, or at least a meaningful list of concepts about pedagogy. Once you finish that process, there are many ways to analyze a repertory grid. So I said I was going to talk about two things. This is the second thing I'm going to talk about. How do we interpret the data that derives from the repertory grid? Well, to begin with, if you do the repertory grid right, you've just had a very interesting conversation with your participant. They've given you a lot of ideas about how they view pedagogy, and so you can just use that data. That might be enough for your research purposes. Here you can see all these concepts. Another thing you can do is to rank them. Once you have a list of 5 or 6 or 12 or 20 different concepts, constructs, you can rank them in order of importance. You'll see there's a number 1 there. That simply means that for this participant, creativity is the most important thing in terms of teaching. And there you can see that I've filled in, or the participant has filled in, all the other constructs with their different ranks. Another thing you can do is to count the constructs, and that actually tells you a great deal. For instance, here is a finished repertory grid from a student that has just entered our teacher training program at the University of Guanajuato. You'll note that this student, who's just beginning their studies, has only been able to come up with 5 constructs. And here is the repertory grid of a student who graduated from our program and has been teaching for a while. And I won't count the number of constructs there, but it certainly seems to be 20 or 25. So you see a lot of growth there between the beginning student and the student who's been teaching for a long time. So that tells us a lot right there, simply by counting those up. Another thing you can do is to put them into categories, which is, I suppose, a form of content analysis. This allows you to compare many, many grids. For instance, this data comes from a study of 80 teachers in training in Singapore. I took all the repertory grids, looked through them, did some content analysis, and put their answers into these different major and minor themes. By doing that, I was able to find out that for them, the number 1 characteristic of a good EFL teacher is their personality, with 18% of the constructs having to do with features of teachers' personalities. And then there's one more thing that you can do with these repertory grids. This is very interesting. You can rate the elements. You'll notice there that we filled in the elements and we filled in all the constructs, but there's still a lot of empty cells. What are those for? Those are for different ratings. So, for instance, I might start here. I often start here by asking the participant to rate themselves, you as you are now. I ask them to rate themselves in terms of no grammar or too much grammar. The participant in this case gives themselves a 1, which means that they don't teach any grammar in their class. However, they give themselves a 7, meaning that they think of themselves as far too serious. And there's room for growth there, obviously, because they would like to be funnier. For them, the opposite of too serious is to be funny. So each cell serves as its own little Likert scale. And we fill them all in using this 1 to 7 scale. You'll see now that it's all filled in, and each of the elements has been rated on the scale between the 2 poles that the participant constructed when they were creating their constructs. Okay, so why would we want to do that? Why do we want all these numbers? Because it gives us another way to look at and to discuss the data. The numerical data is used to create mind maps. Here's the grid of one of our actual participants. This is, of course, we're still at the pre-intervention stage, so this was the first interview. Here it is. You can see that this student, this teacher rather, came up with 6 different constructs. Here's one kind of mind map that you can create. This is a cluster analysis. Everything in red at the bottom represents the different elements. As you can see, the elements that are clustered closest together are you as you would like to be and a great teacher. It's not too surprising, probably, that those cluster together because obviously everybody would like to be a great teacher. But this means that numerically, statistically, the ratings that the participant provided seem to group around those 2 things. Here's the same information. We can take a close-up of that. This is the same information, but with the numerical data there. You can see a great teacher, you as you would like to be, match, the numbers match at 97.2%. That's not so surprising. What's more surprising is that this particular participant at 91.7% matched a great second language teacher with an average second language teacher. And that obviously is interesting. That's something I would like to return to in a future interview and ask why the commonality between those 2 elements. And here's another way that you can make a mind map. These mind maps, of course, are a great way to look at the data, but they're also a great way of talking to the participant about the data because you're making explicit now things that were perhaps implicit before. This principal component analysis allows you to look at elements and constructs at exactly the same time. So here in this graph, you can see in blue the constructs and in red the elements. Here is the principal component analysis. Let's just look at the part that's circled. We can see that a bad second language teacher and the participant in the past are clustered very closely together. So that's interesting. And it's also interesting that they cluster very close to the constructs, didn't plan classes and always the same activities. So that gives us a very interesting visual representation of how the participant felt about themselves in the past. And here, if we go to the other side of the graph, we can see that the participant has grown as a teacher. This is the participant as they are now, and you can see how closely aligned that is with keeping the students engaged. So obviously, this participant feels that they've grown as a teacher and become better. Okay, so that was the pre-interview. Obviously, at the end of the intervention, we'll give another set of these repertory grid interviews to all our participants. And this is what we're hoping to see. We're hoping to see change and growth. On the left-hand side, we have the pre-intervention interview. That's what we just looked at. This post one hasn't been done yet, but it would be nice to see a growth in numbers of constructs and in complexity of the constructs. Obviously, we don't know what the post interview will show But that's part of why this research is so interesting. We're looking forward to doing this research and seeing what we end up with. So that's one way to determine growth and change over time. But of course, we're also doing just regular interviews. And I'm going to pass it back to Patty, who's going to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, Ken. Yes, I just want to briefly present some preliminary qualitative results from the collective accompaniment sessions. We have a questionnaire, introspective questionnaire that the participants have to answer at the end of each session. So one of the questions we asked at our last session, which was very recently, is collective reflection affecting your beliefs? Well, we don't have any clear answers right now. This is very new still. This is very recent, but the project started very recently. So one participant said that by listening to your reflections, to other participants' reflections and issues, I have had the time to analyze and reflect on my own teaching practice and relate to the other's issues, showing empathy. Participant 1 says, I can say that it does not affect my beliefs in order to change them, but what it does is it makes me think about taking care of myself and my health, because this was an issue that was dealt with at that session. Somebody else, participant 5, says it is changing the way I see my practice. So as I said, this is very preliminary still. Some final thoughts after the second session. Participant 1 says we need to be aware of our own abilities and the boundaries we can touch but not trespass. Participant 7 says it is important to respect teachers' and students' privacy and be empathetic with others. And participant 4 says that setting priorities are health, the things we have control of and things we don't, are important as teachers. So those are topics that came up during this session. What we're noticing is that obviously because of the situation we're in, and this goes into the conclusion, this is an ongoing research at its initial stage. We are dealing with very different issues because of the pandemic. Teachers are dealing with problems or issues they've never faced before. So the sessions are conducted online right now, and all the teachers, the participants are teaching online. The issues the teachers are facing are novel and very unusual. And we have not seen any impact of reflection on beliefs so far. We'll continue with our research, and hopefully next time we can show you more results on the impact of reflection on beliefs. These are our references, and we'd like to thank you for being with us. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask us. Thank you.